Hi, I'm Emmy. I've been a student here for a few more years than I'd like to admit, but very proud to share that I'll be graduating in just a month after many, many changes of path. I've learned far more than I could have imagined through 3 different majors, teaching on the other side of the world, constantly evolving social circles, tried and tested relationships, and yet the one thing that has truly granted me my most clear lens for viewing the world before walking across that sought-after graduation stage is this tiny human who entered my life 2 years and 5 months ago. This is Ryland, an incredibly smart, usually gentle and other times a bit destructive, silly, wild, frustrating, and all things beautiful little toddler who is way too aware of their control over my life. And I'm biased, of course, because Ryland is mine, and I could go on about him forever, but that's not why I'm standing here in front of you today. Having a baby in college completely flipped my world upside down, yet at the same time felt absolutely meant to be. I took a year away from school, and during this time, as a new young mom trying to navigate this new life, I constantly found myself drawn to the way strangers treated me and my baby. Nearly everyone who crossed our path had something so kind and genuine to wish upon Ryland. Oh, what a beautiful baby, may God bless you, have such a beautiful life, and so on and so on. And yet, within moments, these same people could turn around and be so incredibly rude to service workers or adults who looked differently or spoke differently than them. And I'm a very visual thinker, so I started to picture a timeline in my mind. A rope, starting at our first breath, and fraying somewhere near 100, to be hopeful. I envisioned my baby, at just a few weeks old, accompanied by a speech bubble, quoting, "Have a beautiful life," and pondered, where exactly on this line is the threshold for when it becomes acceptable to lose that love and respect for a stranger's baby? Is it when they learn to talk? Perhaps when they start to talk back? Staring down at this fresh little human, all I could think about was how worthy his life was of love and respect, and that I never wanted that notion to hinder. So, gentle parenting is a pretty big thing these days. For those of you who aren't so familiar with it, it's a fairly self-explanatory term. We try to be gentle as parents, to speak calmly and clearly, to address the concerns of the child with validity and respect, not to yell or scream, but to set reasonable boundaries. What I found to be the foundation of this parenting ideal is the focus on autonomy, which is a word I'm ashamed to admit did not exist in my vocabulary until college. And I find this to be an issue with our current parent-child paradigm. So, a quick vocabulary lesson to be sure we're all on the same page here. Autonomy, by definition, means the right or condition of self-government, essentially, to act according to your own will. An adjacent key term here is agency, which is when we're given the opportunity to use our autonomy. As babies, our agency is either granted or denied by our parents and caregivers. As we age, the role can be dictated by our teachers, our bosses, even our coworkers, our peers, and our partners. The part that I find to be missing here, though, is the point in which we realize that we hold the highest power over ourselves. And I've theorized that this all comes down to being taught how worthy we are of respect. You see, on this timeline of life, we're only kids for so long. There's such a short period of time where we get to be parented before we decide that we're done learning. There's such a small window for being so impressionable before we decide that we know best, when we want to use our autonomy to our most full advantage, but may not be exactly sure how. So how do we teach this? Ideally, from the beginning. One of the first ways that we found to introduce this idea to Ryland was through respecting his communication, which, of course, can be incredibly trying with an infant who doesn't know to do much more than scream and coo. Ryland didn't speak the word mama until nearly a year old. However, communication is far more than spoken word. Body language comes before words, even as we age, so we use this to our advantage. We began teaching Ryland some basic sign language at around 6 months old. The first 2 signs he learned were please and all done. And when you think about it, most of life's desires can be broken into these 2 categories. Either we want something, or we want to be all done. In order to truly emphasize the effectiveness of his communication, to show him that he had power, through this process, we really had to honor all of his requests. Sometimes, all done after 1 bite of food meant taking him out of the high chair and revisiting dinner in a little bit. Other times, it meant getting out of the bathtub, still soaked in suds. Perhaps unconventional, yet effective. Ryland quickly learned that his body had power and that he could use it. We went on to teach him additional signs like want, more, help, thank you, and so on. Ryland's dad and I commonly told him, this is called effective communication. But one evening, turned to each other and realized that somewhere along the line, we may have failed to prioritize our own effective communication towards each other. I went back to that timeline in my mind and saw where I was standing at 22 years old, evaluating the lessons I was trying to implement to my 6-month-old, and got lost in the decades-long gap. I realized, though, it's not too late to build a bridge between it. If Ryland could comprehend that he was worthy of respect, that his words had power, I could too. I started to navigate this disconnect between how badly I wanted my child to understand his worth and how badly I needed to relearn mine. So there's this idea that everything you need to know, you learned in kindergarten. And there's quite a bit of truth behind it. We're so eager to have children understand these basic social fundamental concepts like sharing, using your words, respecting each other's things, respecting each other's differences. But what happens between the time we're hearing this at 5 years old and preaching it at 25 or 35 and so on? What about all those years in between? As kids, we're handed these concepts as though they're keys to a box that we need to keep unlocked, but somewhere along the line, they get lost. And having a child of my own was really the strongest leading force to go back and dig them back up. And as I began to break down how society works to an infant, I started to realize just how many similarities there are between babies and, well, college students, like myself and many of you here. And as we paved this new path together, I continued to discover these parallels in our lives and what we both have to learn. You see, as college students, we are in a sense infants to the real world. And I find this to be the optimal time to go back and revisit some of these lessons lost. So let's jump back in time and analyze how some of these elementary ideas can be reapplied to our current lives. I think it's fairly often that we forget just how often it is that we make decisions. Every time we speak, we choose to do so. What words to use, our tone of voice, and so on. Of course, sometimes the words come a little faster than we've had the chance to truly think about, but regardless, we're constantly making decisions, whether we're truly conscious of it or not. In fact, before we're really cognizant at all, we're presented with options. From the minute a baby is born, we respond to their cries with questions. Are you hungry? Are you sleepy? Do you need another blanket? Of course, we don't expect them to respond, but it's an important socially developmental interaction. It's crucial that babies learn that they have options. But what happens when they do start responding? When Ryland was around a year old, he started to use yes and no a lot more accurately. I asked him one afternoon, "Hey, would you like to go to the store?" And as I prepared our things, he looked up at me and confidently responded, "No." And I froze. What was I supposed to do? We needed to go to the store, we needed groceries, but I had presented him with an option, and he was very clear about his response. It may sound silly, but it was actually a very critical moment in my understanding of how to best communicate with my child. Rather than asking him things like, "Would you like to go to the store?" when he had no option in it, I considered the things that I could ask him about the situation instead. I started to rephrase these options to him in order to better respect his responses. I would ask him things like, "Hey, we're getting ready to go to the store. Are you excited?" To which he could still respond no, which would have been fine because who's really excited to get groceries? But the important part was the focus was shifted from decision-making to acknowledging his emotions. I would also present options like this to him, such as, "Hey, we're getting ready. Would you like to pick out your shoes, or should I get some for you?" Which still left him the opportunity to make a decision should he choose to do so. It took a lot of conscious effort for us to rephrase these questions to him and figure out how to word all these options. But in the end, it was as simple as saying, "Hey, it's time to eat. Would you like some of this food or some of this one?" I started to pay attention to whether or not something needed to be done and the ways in which those things needed to be done could be accomplished. As a college student myself, there have been plenty of times where I thought, I don't want to do this homework. But relating back to what I was trying to get my infant to understand, I started to rethink how I was making decisions for myself. The homework needs to get done. That part isn't so much an option. The options we do have relate to how exactly we want to get that done. Would I like to take a break from this for now and revisit it after doing something I enjoy? Or would I rather get it done now so I don't have to stress about it later? I was, in a sense, acting quite a bit like my own baby who didn't want to go to the grocery store. But in order to really get him to understand this, I needed to make myself more aware of the decisions I was making. But even beyond this, there's another layer to it. Because my point here is that there shouldn't ever come a time where we lose that love and respect for a stranger's baby. So how does this relate? Well, one of the biggest reasons we find to deny someone respect is when their choices don't quite align with our own. We tend to judge those who are different from us, whether that be as simple or complex as the way they like to dress, the food they like to eat, the car they drive, the jobs they have, the groups they associate with, their gender and sexual orientation. I could go on. However, the more our own choices are respected, the easier it becomes to extend that respect onto others. When we have the opportunity to explore options, to find the things we truly enjoy, when we have the chance to find a vernacular that makes sense for translating the words from our heads, when we get to choose how to dress, when we can decide who we want to be, we are freed from the pressure to fit into someone else's molds, and those molds tend to disappear altogether. Essentially, the more love we get, the more love we have to give. Unfortunately, not everyone is fortunate enough to have been given options from such a young age, or the appropriate tools to make such decisions. Some, like I was, are not aware of the word autonomy, or what it could mean for them. Somewhere along this line, whether it be pressure from adults in our lives as children, or peers as we age, we hit lows where we forget that we have power. When a child is taught that unconditional love means being the person someone else wants them to be, it then skews their perception of the love they have available to give. When we spend our lives extrinsically motivated to please someone else, it can become a challenge to see someone so intrinsically motivated to be the person they want to be. But it's not too late to change these things. We have so many resources right at our fingertips. We have the ability to go back and revisit the moments from our childhood that may have influenced us to make certain decisions later in our lives, and analyze if these choices are consistent with who we feel we truly are and how we want to present ourselves. Maybe we can't control what happens to us, but we do control the choices that we want to make and how we want to interact with each other going forward. We've all been hurt. We've all felt betrayed by people we thought we could trust. Our perception of society as a whole is tainted by the negative experiences that we've all endured. The more our own boundaries are crossed, the less we respect those of others. But we can change these things. We can acknowledge that maybe somewhere along this line, we were denied autonomy. In fact, there were probably countless times in which we were. But we can take it back. We can establish boundaries for ourselves. We can acknowledge the respect we know that we deserve. We can start acting more truly to our authentic selves. And when we reach that sense of self-actualization, it just becomes second nature to wish that onto everyone else. So I'm challenging you from here on out to view everyone you interact with as someone's baby, because we all are. And when you feel judgment creeping in, consider what it is about yourself that hasn't been validated, that's making you think negatively about someone else. Be your own teacher. Take back your autonomy with your own self-granted agency. And when you do have children of your own, consider instilling these values into them as well. Thank you.